If it's Wednesday, the gun debate gets raw and emotional as lawmakers hear testimony from the parents of gun violence victims and an 11-year-old student who survived the Robb Elementary massacre. She had to cover herself in a classmate's blood and play dead to do that. Plus, primary wins for the mainstream of both parties last night as Democratic voters send another warning message to progressives. We'll speak with a top Democrat about the party's path forward in just a moment. Plus, Gisele Fetterman speaks to NBC about the stroke that nearly killed her husband, the campaign's weeks of silence about his health, and when the Democratic Senate nominee in Pennsylvania will get back on the campaign trail. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for streaming with us today. If it's Wednesday, we've got quite a bit of primary results from elections across 7 states yesterday. We're going to get there in a moment. But for a second straight day, there was a raw and emotional and at times gut-wrenching calls for gun reforms here in Washington. In fact, we just thought it had to be moved up and needed to see and hear some of these calls. The House Oversight Committee this morning heard from people who've seen the carnage of gun violence up close, both in Uvalde and Buffalo. What you're about to hear is some of the recorded testimony of 11-year-old Uvalde shooting survivor Maya Cirillo about what she saw happen in her classroom at Robb Elementary School. Take a listen.
There's a door between our classrooms, and he went through there and shot my teacher and told my teacher goodnight and shot her in the head. And then he shot some of my classmates and the whiteboard. When I went to the barracks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me.
If there was something that you want people to know about that day and about you, right? Or things that you want different, what would it be?
To have security.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
And you think it's going to happen again?
By the way, ask yourself, think about this for a moment. Mia, how long she's going to have this memory? Her entire life. Her entire life. Ask yourself if you would want your child to have a memory of that for their entire life. We also heard from Uvalde pediatrician on the grisly scenes he saw in the classroom.
But what I did find was something no prayer will ever relieve. 2 children whose bodies had been pulverized by bullets fired at them, decapitated, whose flesh had been ripped apart, that the only clue as their identities was a blood-splattered cartoon clothes still clinging to them.
Lawmakers listened, many of them clearly emotional at what they heard. If you're a human being, I would hope you would have some ability to show emotion on that front. But the question does remain. Will these personal stories, these emotional calls for gun reform from the people who have suffered the most, who have had to see what the carnage of these wars of weapon do, will it lead to any meaningful reform? Well, it is in the hands of our elected officials. And as we say here all the time, elections matter, and elections, they do have consequences. We're going to bring you more of that emotional hearing. We're going to get you the latest on where negotiations on a gun reform bill actually stand. But we're going to turn now to the way change does happen in this country, at the ballot box. And at the primary polls yesterday, voters in one of the most reliably liberal states signaled they want change, and they are not happy with progressive-style governance. In the Los Angeles mayoral election, Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass and real estate developer Rick Caruso, newcomer to the Democratic Party, are going to be headed to a runoff in that mayoral election. And the progressive candidate in that field, Kevin De Leon, he finished third, a distant third, as in single digits. He was a statewide candidate for the United States Senate not that long ago, the endorsed candidate by the California Democratic Party not that long ago. That shows you how popular progressive politics is in Los Angeles. He didn't even win the area he represents on the city commission, by the way. Caruso spent a ton of his own money and based his campaign on homelessness and crime. the top issue in the polls out there. He called last night's results a great awakening for Los Angeles and a vote to change the status quo. Meanwhile, farther up the coast in San Francisco, voters recalled the progressive district attorney, Chesa Boudin, by a vote of 60-40. That was not close. That is not a bunch of Trump voters, folks, that are saying no to Chesa Boudin. These are a lot of people that are voters for Gavin Newsom and for Joe Biden. Just keep that in mind. Boudin was part of a wave of progressive prosecutors who pledged to hold police accountable and decrease incarceration rates by seeking alternatives to prosecuting low-level offenders. But voters in one of the most progressive cities grew extraordinarily frustrated with the perception that his office was simply not willing to do much about crime at all, let alone homelessness that is showing itself all over residential areas in the city. Now, Boudin, he blamed his defeat on an organized campaign of frustration and outrage.
The right-wing billionaires outspent us 3-1. They exploited an environment in which people are appropriately upset. And they created an electoral dynamic where we were literally shadow boxing. Voters were not asked to choose between criminal justice reform and something else. They were given an opportunity to voice their frustration and their outrage, and they took that opportunity.
Remember, Boudin is not even the first San Francisco official on the left to get recalled this calendar year. Voters ousted 3 school board members in February over frustrations that they were putting progressive policies ahead of student well-being, particularly amid the pandemic closures. Taken together, if voters in San Francisco and Los Angeles are saying they want change, and that change is moving away from progressive leadership, it is a message that can't be ignored by Democrats in Washington and across America. So joining me now is the number 3 Democrat in the House of Representatives, it's South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn. And Congressman, it's always good to see you, sir.
Thank you very much for having me, Chuck.
Look, you were one of the loudest voices, I think, the day after the election in 2020. You were happy about Joe Biden, but you were not happy about another Joe Cunningham. And I remember you talking about this defund the police business. And I say this because what I want to, it does feel as if California is now ground zero of where mainstream Democratic voters are going, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, these are not conservative voters in Los Angeles. These are not conservative Trump voters in San Francisco. I take it you share some of their frustrations.
Well, yes, I do. I spent last weekend in New Jersey and Michigan. The weekend before, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, New Haven, Connecticut, and I've been talking to people, and I can tell you, people are much more interested in how they are going to navigate this life that they're trying to live, how they're going to protect their children, how they're going to really prepare for a more productive life than all of these sloganeering that seem to get us in too much trouble. And so I have been saying to all of my constituents, I've been saying to all of my colleagues, let's focus on people, their families, their communities, and stop all the sloganeering. What can this policy do to make life better for this person, this person's family, and this person's community? And forget about all the other stuff. And I think that's what we're seeing showing up at the polls these days.
Do you, does this, look, a lot of these more progressive folks got elected in a little bit of the halcyon days of 17, 18, and 19 when Democrats were just motivated to do whatever it took to send a message to Trump, right? Whatever it took. And they didn't pay attention to maybe who they were voting for. They were more interested in sending a message against. Is this a rebuke of progressive governance, or is this just a reminder that you got to articulate better what you're doing?
Just a reminder. No, this is no rebuke of these governance. Look, I challenge anybody to show me a voting record here in the Congress that's more progressive than mine. But I spend my time talking to people and listening to people and trying to do what I can to help them navigate through all of the difficulties that they're having. I chair the select subcommittee on the coronavirus. And I know the frustration that people are having. I know people want their children not just to be safe in schools from gun violence, they also want to be safe from the kind of HVAC systems that don't work, restrooms that ain't up to par, the kinds of things. They want their children to have a good learning environment.
Right.
And we need to talk all of that holistically, not just what may be the order of the day, but what may be on people's minds as they try to get their families and their children ready for the future.
Let me stay with one more political topic for you. I want to play you a quote from Henry Cuellar. He's somebody you campaigned for. It looks like he has survived his runoff. But he's very opinionated about the progressive movement these days. Let me play something he said, and I'm curious of your reaction.
There's a left sector of our party that feels that the only standard that should be out there is that you should agree with me 100% of the time. And that far left is trying to purify members, just like the Tea Party did back some years ago against my Republican colleagues. So it's the fringes are doing this. And in my party, you got the far left that just don't understand reality.
What do you make of his description of what's happening there? Are you concerned that there is a Tea Party-like purification process going on the progressive left?
No, I don't think so. I think there are degrees of everything. There are some people who are farther left than I am, but I am left of the spectrum. I tell people all the time, it's not just the substance of what you do, but your style also means a little something. And so I don't go around calling people's names. I try to talk to people based upon what the situations are. So left or right, that doesn't matter to me. I tell people all the time, my father was very conservative, but he never asked his congregations, he happened to be a minister, he never asked his congregations to give conservatively, he asked them to give liberally. And so we have to have balance in our lives. So I don't get carried away with whether it's left or right. I just try to do what is right.
Let's talk about the gun issue here. And I want to ask you this more from the terms of, let's go back to where I started. Joe Cunningham. What is a gun law that can get passed that a Joe Cunningham could get elected in South Carolina and support? Now, I know he's not in Congress right now. He wouldn't be voting on it. But you get the spirit of my question. What's realistic and something that you could get done here in Washington and wouldn't get you unelected in South Carolina?
Well, Joe Cunningham lives down in Charleston. He lived through the Emanuel 9.
Yeah.
He understood what that young man had on his mind when he bought those guns. He wanted to start a race war. We saw what happened up in Buffalo. That young man, less than 21 years old, being indoctrinated by somebody, wanted to start a race war. We keep taking all the stuff out of this equation. These things about guns cannot be limited to people who may be hunters. Your Second Amendment rights should not give you the right to buy weapons of war to start a race war. It ought not allow you to get the weapons of war and go into a classroom and tear up the bodies of little children. We have limits on the First Amendment, and there are limits on the Second Amendment as well. This whole notion that the Second Amendment rights cannot be curtailed, cannot in any way be moderated, that's just not realistic. So Joe Cunningham can vote for raising the age from 18 to 21. Joe Cunningham could vote for getting rid of bump stocks to make an automatic weapon out of just an ordinary weapon. Or what we call ghost guns, going online and making a gun that is dangerous.
Right. Or
what we call red flag laws. I raise a red flag if I try to deposit more than $10,000 in my bank account.
Yeah.
So why don't we have red flags when someone gets two big guns and go back and get 30 rounds of what we call high capacity cartridges or magazines? That ought to raise a red flag.
And if you're doing it legally, then explain it to those that ask. Just like if you deposit more than $10,000, if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't have anything to fear. If anybody's checking up on you. Right, Congressman?
That's exactly what I think.
All right. Congressman Jim Clyburn, I always feel like our viewers learn something from you when you're on. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Well, it wasn't just mainstream Democrats who had a decent night. It was a pretty good primary night for mainstream Republicans, as defined, say, not being so Trumpy, although some of the votes are still being counted. So join me now to break down more of last night's primaries. Who else but Mr. Kornacki at the big board? You know, Steve, I want to be careful drawing large conclusions here, but it's sort of a general, it did feel as if you're somebody that's keeping score through the prism of Trump, it wasn't Trump's best night, although there's a bigger test coming in a week.
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think what we saw last night in some ways kind of increases the suspense for next week. Let's start in California, because there were two districts in particular where I think what you'd call the Republican establishment, mainstream Republicans, national Republicans, whatever term you want to use, were concerned about their incumbents potentially not getting out of the top two primary last night. So let's take a look at those two districts. Number one is the 40th district here. This is Young Kim, freshman Republican Congresswoman. Now, you notice there's no check mark next to her name yet. NBC has not called this yet, but you do see she's got about a 10-point lead over her closest Republican opponent. Remember, open primary California, Democrats, Republicans, same ballot, top two advance. So this is what Republicans were hoping to see, mainstream Republicans were hoping to see. Greg Rath was the Republican who was trying to rally kind of the pro-Trump right, sneak into that second spot. Looks like he's got a tough, again, we haven't called it, but would be surprising at this point if he takes out Young Kim. So that would be something the mainstream Republicans were very much hoping to see. Here's something else that I think is a little bit more complicated. The other district in California they're worried about, David Valadao, Republican incumbent. Now, he voted to impeach Donald Trump after January 6th last year. Now, there's one Democrat in this race, Rudy Salas, state legislator. He's clearly finishing first. He's through to the general election. This race drew three Republican candidates, and you can see one, Chris Matisse, is closer to Valadao. Again, we've not yet projected that Valadao is actually going to finish second and advance to the general election, although it would be a pretty steep hill for Matisse to climb as the final results come in. But you add up the Matisse and Medeiros votes, and you're ahead of the Valadao count there. So it speaks to a fracturing of the Republican party there in that district from that Valadao vote. And again, this is a very difficult district for Valadao in a general election, right, because it voted for Joe Biden by 13 points. But I think the surprise last night that I think nobody was quite ready for, and that complicates things heading into next week, is this one in Mississippi, the third district in Mississippi. Almost all the votes are counted now, and an incumbent Republican, Michael Guest, is still running in second. He's running behind a challenger, Michael Cassidy. Guest voted for the independent January 6th commission. Cassidy made that a major issue in his campaign. It looks like whatever happens with the final votes that are counted here, this is going to go to a runoff. Mississippi's a runoff state. There's a real chance that Guest is going to lose his seat, and the main reason he's going to lose his seat is because of that vote for the January 6th commission. So you say it sets up the suspense for next week in South Carolina. You got Nancy Mason, incumbent, being challenged by Trump-backed Katie Arrington, and then you've got Tom Rice, Republican who voted for impeachment. There's your Trump-backed opponent, Russell Fry, and a few others. So read those tea leaves last night however you want, but I think, we're getting two clear tests next week. Yeah, no, and Rice feels like we're headed to a runoff. Obviously not a third candidate in the first there, so we shall see. And impeachment may matter more than January 6th, but as you showed in Mississippi. And at some point, Steve, I'm going to make you break this down a bit regionally. It does feel as if Trump does better in the South at times than he does in other parts, but let's see. We got a whole bunch of primaries in August before we can make those claims. Yep. Exactly. Mr. Kornacki, as always, sir, thank you. Thanks. Coming up, we're going to head back to Capitol Hill. We're going to want to look at more of that emotional gun violence testimony that we've seen, how Washington is reacting to it, and whether it will have an impact. And as we go to break, I also want to give you some of President Biden's reaction to last night's election results and what he says it means on the issue of violent crime.
I think the voters sent a clear message last night. Both parties have to step up and do something about crime as well as gun violence. It's time the states and the localities spend the money they have to deal with crime, as well as retrain police officers, as well as provide for more community policing. It's time to get on with doing that, and that's what I think the message last night from the American public was in all the primaries. Thank you.
Common sense gun laws are not about your personal feelings or beliefs. You are elected because you have been chosen and are trusted to protect us. But let me say to you here today, I do not feel protected.
Innocent children all over the country today are dead because laws and policy allows people to buy weapons before they're legally old enough to even buy a pack of beer. The thing I can't figure out is whether our politicians are failing us out of stubbornness, passivity, or both.
Welcome back. That was more testimony from this morning's House hearing on gun violence as the mother of a survivor of the Buffalo grocery store shooting and a doctor from Uvalde blamed lawmakers for simply not passing legislation to prevent these mass shootings from taking place. So let's break this down a little bit. I'm joined now by my panel, Republican strategist Matt Gorman, Navin Nayak, president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, there's no shortage of emotional moments on this debate. I'll be honest with you, whether we go back to the day of the shootings, you talk to the parents, you see the raw moments, then even after they've collected themselves and they tell us these stories, it moves the public. Is it going to move the lawmakers?
That's the key question. But in a country where we say we want to protect children in particular, to hear an 11-year-old go before Congress to say, I smeared blood on a friend, I smeared blood of a friend on my body to stay alive. I saw my teacher get shot in the head. That 11-year-old, to me, out of all the different things that happened this week, she struck me the most because she is asking lawmakers to make her safe. And there was someone who asked her during her testimony, do you feel safe going to school? Mm-hmm. And she shook her head no. That, to me, says that this is why it feels different. And when you listen to lawmakers and you listen to people like John Cornyn and Mitch McConnell and others, continue to say that there's openness, continue to say even days after this that they are looking at some of the same things that they've been talking about for a couple of days now, which is red flag laws, possibly increasing the age of assault, that you can access assault weapons. It tells me that this is possibly more possible than it's ever been before. After Sandy Hook, it became so partisan so quickly. This feels different, and when you hear lawmakers, it sounds like they think something's different. But of course, Congress is Congress, and Congress is really good at doing nothing. So we have to sort of continue to see whether or not these lawmakers remain optimistic.
Matt, you worked at the Senate committee a couple cycles ago. You know how this conference thinks. There's a lot of ways to read these Mitch McConnell tea leaves. Mm-hmm. The news that came out, and he was willing to confirm, yeah, he's open to the idea of raising the age. It's not going to be in this package. But I heard that and I thought, Mitch McConnell's going to vote for whatever Cornyn agrees with. Is that how you read that?
Yeah, his silence tells me is a positive sign.
Yeah,
and I think also Cornyn, it was either earlier this week or late last week, went to the floor, gave a speech, and it essentially sounded like he was road testing how he would sell this bill, not only to the conference but also voters in Texas, and how we expect Senate candidates to sell it. And look, Cornyn's younger. He's still a political animal. He ran the NRSC about a decade ago, and I think most telling, him, John Thune, and John Barrasso all want to succeed McConnell, and he's in theory giving them something if they wanted to use against him.
And Matt, here's the other theory I've had of why McConnell. I think you tell me, but I look at the Atlanta suburbs, Philadelphia suburbs, the Phoenix suburbs,
yep,
Las Vegas suburbs. You know where I'm going here.
Yep.
And that he knows if they get caught doing nothing and it's on them, then it probably costs them Senate seat.
You know, it's certainly the same thing I would say about more crime quality of life. Even though you might not live in the city, you might not see the effects day to day, you're still in the media market. You're still hearing of the news in L.A. or in the Philly news at 11 o'clock every night. And so politically, it does feel different.
What do you say, Navin?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is we're going to have votes today in the House. And it's just, it actually is. You know, I have a third.
Will we get the separate votes? To me, the separate votes, we want to put everybody on the record, because I do think there are some Republicans that would like to show some support on some things, but not everything.
But it's not even clear they're going to have the assault weapons ban. I mean, there's just
on the
all
Democrat
these other
side,
but all the other provisions. I mean, 19 kids just got killed, and you still can't get a majority of the Republican caucus to support this. I mean, the fact that Mitch McConnell has to say it quietly, that's a good sign. Why can't he be vocal? Our kids are scared to go to school. Like, I don't understand at what point, and this is sort of the real test for me, and just this is what it's all about. It's all about power for Republicans right now. If they really cared about safety, we know how to solve this problem. We know how to keep our kids safe in school. The Republican Party is showing that all they care about, to your point, is elections. And if they think doing nothing gives them a chance of getting elected, they will do nothing.
Go ahead if you want to.
I mean, that's just not based in reality. I mean, look, Chris Murphy is even having pretty good faith discussions with Republicans on this. And it's not Susan Collins. It's not Lisa Murkowski. It's Tom Tillis. And
but it's not going to be a majority of the caucus.
Okay, well, then why don't you tell Chris Murphy that and have him pull out of the talks? If it's not enough for Democrats, then it's certainly enough for Chris Murphy. And look, any Senate, any compromise is going to start in the Senate. They have the votes in the House for whatever the Senate comes up with. If you want something done, it's the Senate.
I'm not suggesting that if it's not everything, that we should do nothing. I think there's no question that getting something done is just an important thing to tell the American people. But it is still really hard to believe that there isn't a unanimous vote here, or that there isn't a majority of a Republican caucus that is willing to do that. That's got to be discouraging to you, that when 19 kids get killed, that you still can't get a majority saying anything should be done.
Let's get an update on where the talks stand. Ali Vitale, so I want to pause this conversation. Ali, where are we? We know, as Navin was pointing out, we have votes in the House, a lot of votes in the House. I was intrigued by Jim Clyburn's comments to me about what he didn't say and what he did say, sort of what could work in a swing district in South Carolina. He didn't talk about an assault weapons ban and certain things, talked about red flag laws, talked even about raising the age. And I'm curious on the raising the age aspect. Is that at all going to be brought back into these conversations, or are we still circling around the four provisions of hardened school safety, red flag laws, background checks, and mental health funding?
Yeah, those are still the buckets on the Senate side, and I think that it's a really important delineation that you make of what the difference is between the House and the Senate here, because even this morning, as I was talking to House Republican leadership, a colleague and I tried to nail down Steve Scalise on, okay, if Republicans in the Senate were able to cobble together a package that included the things that Republicans wanted on mental health and school safety, could you get behind red flag laws? And it's not unheard of for Republicans to back this kind of stuff. Rick Scott himself, when he was governor in 2018, after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas did pass, among other things in Florida, red flag laws. Nevertheless, the permission structure for compromise on this issue in the Senate is so different than what it is in the House. And you look no further than the conversation that I had with House Republican leadership this morning, where they were unyielding on the idea that you should do anything other than hardening schools and dealing with mental health issues. I also think there's another conversation that's top of mind for me right now with Chris Jacobs, who said he's not running for re-election now, even though he came out and said he wanted to do something on assault weapons and other key provisions there. What he was saying is that he said to me very candidly, you know, hardening schools might be a piece of this, but you can't harden every grocery store and movie theater, and that's just the reality here. But of course, reality and politics don't always necessarily match up. I will say there's still some optimism, so your panel's not wrong, but those talks are just kind of still ongoing with no deadline really to them.
Well, look, you brought up something that I was just about to play, and I'm glad you did. Thank you, Ali Vitale. And that is the Steve Scalise reaction, because I think he speaks for sort of the more conservative mainstream wing of the party, who's not ready to sign on to many of these ideas. Take a listen to Congressman Scalise.
The idea that you would try to take away somebody's constitutional rights without due process is an un-American concept.
But I'm asking,
in the bill, they've never attempted to work with us to even address whether due process should be part of the package.
But my question is not about the House bill. Are you against red flag laws as a broad proposition?
What I've been concerned about is this idea that if you think that just taking guns away from American citizens is the answer, we've seen over and over how that's not worked.
So, Matt, that's an intriguing way he just worded that. There is about half the conference looks like they're open to supporting red flag laws. But that is going to be the pushback that you hear, and that is usually an effective pushback with voters, conservative voters, which is they want to take your guns.
Exactly. And look, no matter what it come up with, you're going to hear that to some extent. That's just to be expected. I think to the point about the political side of this, if you're a young Kim, if you're somebody running in, say, Bucks County, I think you're going to have somewhat support of this. And again, it all depends on what comes out of the Senate. I think that I wouldn't get ahead of myself, and I wouldn't commit to anything until I see a Senate package. But I think you're probably going to see half that.
Yamiche, are Democrats disciplined enough to let the Republic, if it's not going to happen, let it be Republican on Republican political crime?
It's a great question. I think that Democrats are clearly going to be vocal about the fact that Chuck Schumer and some of their leaders weren't able to sort of broker a deal with Republicans because of the fact that we're in this emotionally charged moment where you have Matthew McConaughey and others who grew up with guns. Because you think about Uvalde, Texas, and the people there with their gun culture saying that something needs to be done. I think when it comes to Democrats, they obviously have had a lot of things that they can't get on the same page about, frankly. So in some ways, I think that it's a tough question. But I think overall, you're going to be hearing a lot of Democrats really aim at Republicans and saying they're the reason why we can't get something done. They're the reason why this didn't go through.
You know, Navin, I'm curious where you are on this, because I know whatever they come up with, you're like, it's not enough. On the other hand, I imagine you wouldn't mind being able to say they wouldn't even do that at the end of the day. But can you celebrate if they get something?
Of course. I mean, this really should be the point of it. We're trying to keep people's lives safe. So absolutely, I think getting
any
something
progress
done,
is progress.
I think that is. I think you got to show. I just think that yes, the Democratic base might be frustrated that not more was done, but not getting anything done, I think, is really dispiriting for the long haul, for politics. I mean, what are these people doing here? As Chris Murphy said the next night or that same night, what are they doing here if they can't even keep our kids safe in school?
Matt, what is your sense? I mean, I know Cornyn wants 20 votes because you can't just find 10.
Yeah.
I am sure there are a few senators that are just struggling with this decision. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. The hinge point for me is if they include raising the age, I would expect to see fewer Republicans than 20. This is just pure speculation. I think it's more of a hinge point. You even heard McConnell say that. I think if that's not in the bill, I think 20 is realistic.
Well, then it sounds like they're not going to include the age limit.
Yeah, it does. As of today, I heard Joni Ernst and Murkowski are pushing for that. But McConnell, we all know he has his finger in the pulse of the caucus. If he doesn't think there's votes, it won't be votes.
Yeah. But to get back to your question, that's why it says it really is about what ends up in the bill. Because if you don't have something that makes people actually feel safer, if you don't have something that people walk away with being able to say, yes, I'm not going to possibly be able to have to see another 11-year-old testify before Congress. I'm not going to have to hear another mother pull off her flip-flops and run a mile to a school because of this provision. If that doesn't happen and people don't walk away with that, I could see a lot of Democrats still being vocal about the fact that not enough was done.
I want to play unfrozen caveman lawyer here, which is just sort of like there were 2 mass shootings, both were 18 years old, and we're not touching the age limit. Like, I wonder, Matt, if it's one of those, well, if you don't do that, then you do anything.
Yeah. Well, what I would say to unfrozen caveman lawyer, though, is if imagine a little while ago, you have Chris Murphy and John Cornyn announcing a major package on guns, and for Democrats to say that's not enough, I would be startled.
Navin, I assume part of the age limit thing that's going on here is the Supreme Court's going to weigh in on this, right? On this age issue, I think in a New York case, perhaps in the next, could be days.
Right, and further take away the state's ability to actually regulate these laws. So I think this is the point. The courts are hamstringing states' ability to do these things, and Congress is saying, we're not going to do anything. Where does that leave people? All
right, bad news, I got to take a break. Good news, you guys can't go anywhere. Coming up, we're going to talk about new questions about the health of John Fetterman, the Democrats' candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania, as he recovers from a stroke. My NBC colleague Dasha Burns caught up with both Fetterman and his wife. That's next. Welcome back. We're going to do a little raw politics. Pennsylvania Democratic candidate John Fetterman is said to be gearing up for his November Senate race, but he still has not been on the campaign trail for weeks while recovering from a stroke he suffered just days before the primary night. My colleague Dasha Burns spoke to both Fetterman and his wife, sitting down with Gisele Fetterman for a one-on-one. So, Dasha, I know you spoke to John Fetterman off camera. He is not on camera for this interview. He hasn't done any on-camera interviews since the stroke. I'll let you take it away, but at what point will we be hearing from the Senate candidate himself?
Yeah, all great questions and all questions we're still sort of waiting on answers on. John Fetterman dropped by briefly in his open-air Jeep. He came and said hello. I asked how he's feeling. He said he was feeling good. But you're right, he's not doing formal interviews right now. So instead, we sat down with his wife, Gisele Fetterman, who has gone from spouse to surrogate in the last several weeks. And, you know, she told me that John really views what has happened to him as a second chance. We learned from the letter from his cardiologist and from his own statement that he was diagnosed with AFib back in 2017, but neglected to follow doctor's orders. He didn't take his medication. He didn't come in for a follow-up. And he said he has learned his lesson. Gisele says he's learned it the hard way. You know, I asked her if the stages of sort of emotion that we all go through, you know, when a loved one is in harm's way, I think oftentimes there's that initial worry or fear. Then there's the relief knowing that they're okay. And then sometimes, Chuck, at least for me, there's frustration if it's their own actions that sort of put them in that situation. And I asked if she was frustrated with her husband, and she told me yes. And I want you to hear just a little bit of what she told me. Take a listen.
I remember the AFib happening. I remember he went to the hospital then, but I had 3 tiny babies.
Yeah.
It was a very quick visit to the hospital. It didn't seem that big, but I was also managing so much more. I don't think a spouse is responsible for that. I think we all have to take responsibility. So, you know, back then he lost a ton of weight and was really active and looked and felt great. And that's kind of where it was. Whether he was filling his prescriptions, I mean, I'm not like his mother, so
Nor should anyone be.
Nor should anyone be. Yeah. But again, it's a lesson he had to learn the hard way.
John, as you mentioned, won, you know, every county. He clearly has a lot of support and a lot of people invested in him and his future and in this race. Do you think that those voters deserve to know some of this information sooner?
I think we did. I mean, we turned around in under 48 hours. I think that's really soon. And after his cardiologist visit, we released it the next day. I don't know how much sooner we can do than that.
Chuck, I also did ask Gisele when voters can expect to see John back on the campaign trail. She said the timeline is looking like a few weeks, so end of June, early July. But of course, this is a serious condition. He suffered a stroke, and you know, we'll see what that timeline practically actually looks like.
Dasha Burns, it's a fascinating interview, fascinating decision by the Fettermans and how they've gone about this. Really appreciate the hard work you've been doing. I'm joined now by the panel again, Republican strategist Matt Gorman, Navin Nayak, president of Center for American Progress Action Fund, and NBC News correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Look, a little history here. Tim Johnson suffered a stroke, couldn't really speak, and he won re-election in 2002 and was able to pull that off. Mark Kirk suffered a stroke. I believe he did not win re-election. I think voters process these things very personally, I think, sometimes depending on what they know about a healthcare situation. But Yamiche, the thing that can trip up candidates is that it doesn't feel like they're telling us everything.
I was going to say this really is going to come down to one key word, and it's transparency. Do voters feel like John Fetterman is giving them the information that they deserve as someone who is running to lead the state of Pennsylvania? I think it's an interesting decision to put the second lady on, to put his wife on, and to have him sort of talking to Dasha but not wanting to do a formal sit-down interview. I think that makes it a little bit questionable about in sort of why he's not going on camera. Why are they not? Yeah. Why is he not ready? That being said, the fact that he put out a statement that said, "I almost died." Yeah. I mean, you can't really get more transparent than that in terms of sort of telling people this was serious. He wasn't saying, "Oh, I'm kind of getting over this." He was saying, "I could have lost my life." It is interesting, of course, to see what the Republican candidate, Dr. Oz, ends up doing about sort of talking about this and how he ends up spinning this and how he ends up messaging on this. It's a sensitive topic.
I mean, time's on Fetterman's side for now.
I mean, listen.
Until it's not. I mean, right? Meaning, like, he's still got, I think, nobody's demanding him on the trail, honestly, till Labor Day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think if his health is fine, I really have a hard time seeing how this becomes an issue. He's not, age isn't a factor. I mean, this guy.
And he's not running to be president. I don't mean to say that there is I think that there's, in some of the voters' minds, there'll be a difference.
And if there's one thing you'd say about this guy, is he's not a shady politician. This guy is like, I mean, he wears it on his sleeve, quite literally. And so I think it's going to be hard to pin him as being, not being transparent with voters. And if his health is fine, just given the way it looks. I was encouraged by the fact that, he had B-roll footage there of him talking to Dasha in the Jeep. And
being in the Jeep, being in the driver's seat, we couldn't confirm. People are going to ask, did he drive there? Did he not? We don't know. So we can't do that. But the fact, you're right, it gave the appearance of feeling. Matt, put your NRSC or give a warning shot to your friends there. This is tricky do you ignore it, let voters make their own decision about it?
I mean, yeah. And I think you can point out, to Yamiche's point, it feels a little smoke and mirrorsy, right? Where he's not going to talk on camera. There's B-roll. He's not. There's a lack of transparency there, and I hope he's okay regardless. There's just a lack of transparency there, and you're right. He has the reputation as being a straight talker. This can undermine that a little bit. And to your point, Labor Day, I believe there's a deadline when they need to decide whether he's going to be on the ballot or not. And I think that's the next one. I think it's end of June. Don't quote me on that.
End of this June. All right. We had some primaries yesterday. Very quickly. Progressives taking it on the chin. You have the word progress in your title, so I throw it. But I mean, I would argue that CAP has always, I think, been in the mainstream of where the Democratic Party is. But what would you say is the message that appears mainstream Democratic voters sent to progressive Democrats in San Francisco?
I actually think the president said it really well. It's like crime is a real issue. Democrats cannot hide from this issue, and they shouldn't hide, right? Crime is an issue everywhere in the country. I mean, Fresno, not too far from San Francisco, has a higher murder rate. They have a Republican mayor. They've got a former police chief. This is a problem across the country, and people are frustrated. And this is where I think, our first conversation around gun violence. There's no question that the rise in violent crime in this country is a rise in gun violence, right? 80% of the homicides in this country are committed with a firearm. Democrats should not shy away from this issue. We should lean into the solutions we have, and I think Republicans are causing the problem to get worse.
One other aspect what has been the more interesting issue here? Is it inside, outside? Is it Washington, anti-Washington? I've noticed, Yamiche, a lot of people whose first name are congressmen, if they're trying to run in another race, it doesn't go so well.
It doesn't go so well. And having talked to a lot of voters on both the Democratic side and the Republican side, there is, I think, even more than usual, a real frustration with Washington, a real frustration with the fact that they don't feel like the government, voters that is, don't feel like the government is really responding to their needs, to their priorities. While this economy is going well for some people, and of course unemployment is low, there are a lot of people who are like, between the baby formula and inflation and gas prices, they just feel like maybe just a new face, a new name is what they want.
By the way, little breaking news here. Fetterman did drive his Jeep, and Dasha did witness that for those. So an important point there.
So he's driving, but not on camera.
He's driving, but not on camera. But to break the other point, Pennsylvania is emblematic of this. Give us different people. Fetterman and Oz are not your cookie cutter candidates this year, that's for sure. Thank you, guys. Welcome to a lengthy panel. This is what life in streaming is all about. You can catch more of Dasha Burns' interview with Gisele Fetterman tonight on the NBC Nightly News. And you can also find more of it on our newly relaunched Meet the Press blog at nbcnews.com/meetthepress. Up ahead, the president heads to Los Angeles. He's going to attend a U.S.-hosted Summit of Americas, but it's the folks not attending that are making the headlines. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. You are looking at live pictures out of Los Angeles. That's where President Biden has just landed. And as we mentioned, he's there hosting the Summit of the Americas. The White House has been counting on the summit as an opportunity to lead on issues like immigration and climate change, try to bring some hemispheric unity, if you will. But the event so far has been dominated more about who's not in attendance. Representatives from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua were not invited by the United States over concerns about human rights and a lack of democratic policies and democracy in those countries. That decision led to Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO, deciding to skip the summit. And guess what? He's not alone. He's one of a half dozen Central American leaders who aren't in L.A., including the leaders of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the so-called Northern Triangle of Central America. And those were three leaders that we know the White House personally leaned on to try to get there. Ian Bremmer is president of the Eurasia Group and G0 Media. He's author of the new book, a really good book. It's not a long read, so you should get it. The Power of Crisis, How Three Threats and Our Response Will Change the World, whether we like it or not. But Ian, I want to start with our hemisphere here. And this, I mean, we're the United States of America. We're hosting the first Summit of the Americas since the 1990s. And we have this many no-shows from leaders. How does the United States not take this as a regional insult?
Well, I mean, more states are coming than aren't coming. So, I mean, if it was a vote, I guess we're sort of winning. But you're right. It's a problem. But, of course, it's also not been a priority. Biden's trip to Asia has been much more important. His upcoming trip to the Middle East, especially if there's a Saudi visit, much more important with where oil prices are right now. Upcoming NATO summit in Madrid with a NATO expansion and dealing with the Russian war in Ukraine. I mean, pretty much every other region of the world has been getting a lot more attention than the Western Hemisphere, than Latin America. And the two big issues that are driving the attention of most of the leaders when they talk about the United States are migration, where the Americans don't have a positive policy agenda, we're too divided, and trade, where the Americans don't have a positive policy agenda because we're not interested in providing market access. So even if they all showed up, it's not clear that we'd be able to get a lot done.
Look, I as a kid who grew up in South Florida, have my own interest in Latin American politics, and nothing's more frustrating for me over 30 years than to watch administration after administration pledge when they campaign in Florida to say they're going to focus more on the Western Hemisphere, and literally they get into office and Europe and Asia distracts them. And I think this is why we can't get good relations when it comes to migration.
Well, there's also the point that the Chinese have a much longer leaders in power, and they're able to take a longer view at their foreign investments. And the Belt and Road has meant that Latin American economies have larger trade relationships with China than they do with the United States. And we talk about Build Back Better World. You remember that announcement we made for big infrastructure investments back at the G7. But there's really been no meat on that bone over the last year. And so, I mean, even if you're a government that's quite friendly and well-disposed to the United States, like Colombia's President Duque, who's making his last visit before the upcoming elections, he needs to hedge much more with the Chinese because those guys are writing the big checks. And that's... Look, I mean, the Argentines are here because their economy is in free fall, and they desperately need the IMF, and they desperately need the American nod on that. But that feels more like 20th century Washington consensus, a bit of a holdover than what most of the South American countries are thinking about right now.
Hey, look, I don't have a ton of time, but you brought up the Saudi trip. That is a trip that was supposedly on, then it's not on for when they say it's down the road. This doesn't appear to be a scheduling snafu. It certainly looks to me like there's a certain principal that doesn't want to do this trip, and there's a whole bunch of people around him that are insisting that he do this trip.
I think that he's moved towards yes. The Saudis with OPEC Plus have actually increased production recently. There's been a ceasefire with Yemen. There's been some significant negotiations, diplomacy between the Saudis and the Israelis, which is pretty productive. America's two largest allies in the region. Look, Biden said when he was running for office that he was going to make Saudi Arabia into an international pariah. He probably still feels that way. He was wrong. It was never going to happen. The people were already had the Khashoggi murder in the rearview mirror. And the fact is that a combination of economic reform, deep pockets, and oil prices at $1.20 makes the Saudis a lot more relevant, including to the United States. So if you made me bet, Biden's making that trip.
He just may not make it when they scheduled it. Your book, what is interesting to me about your book is you identify the big three crises, technology, climate change in particular. But I'm curious, can we solve these big crises without some strong, small d democracy around the world?
It is certainly harder when the most powerful country in the world is also the most politically dysfunctional of the advanced industrial democracies. And yet, the fact that power itself is becoming more diffuse, the fact that governors and mayors and bankers and CEOs and NGOs in the United States move the needle on things like climate change, and the fact that the Europeans come out of the pandemic stronger as the EU than they were coming in, means that the solutions are actually more diffuse. And so maybe they're not the big, bold solutions of the Marshall Plan after World War II, but there's absolutely more capacity for progress and for hope.
Well, there's quite a few other countries where it's a lot, you can make a lot more progress working with the private sector than the public sector. I can't believe that that's what's going to happen here, but that may be the answer. Ian Bremmer, thank you, sir. And again, don't miss his new book, The Power of Crisis, How 3 Threats and Our Response Will Change the World. We talked all about that and more, by the way, in a recent podcast on the Chuck Toddcast. So get it wherever you get your podcasts. And we've already got a new one up today on Wednesday morning quarterbacking primary night. And a quick programming note. Catch special coverage of the first public hearings of the House investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. It's tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's right here on NBC News and on NBC News Now. Thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right after this break.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.